Hello everybody, welcome to those who have been here before and welcome back to those who have watched before. Thanks for coming again. My name is Aaliyah Langley and we're here to discuss the 3 books I read in January 2026. Great reads, honestly really great to start the year with a great set of reads. I gave all 3 reads 5 stars, which I don't know if that's even happened before in a month. But I read really 3 great books this January, and I'm looking forward to talking about them briefly with you all. I will say, as I always kind of mention, follow me on Goodreads. I'll be posting up my reviews for each of these books after I finish this video. You could see all my thoughts on the books there. If the video's not enough, maybe you also can see my highlights from the Kindle editions that I try to get for each of these books as well, that I can highlight, things like that. You could see my highlights, notes, etc. Things I've read from last year, years before I was even doing these videos. They're all kind of up there. So find me at Goodreads at Aaliyah Langley, where you can pretty much find me anywhere else. But let's jump in to the first book of January 2026. The very first one, I wanted to start, before I even say what it is, I really wanted to start January 2026, first book of the year, with a book that I hoped I would really, recommend, rate highly, things like that. The first book I read last year was really not good at all, but it was a very popular book and things like that. But I remember kind of being like, oh, that was my first book of the year. So part of me was like, hey, I really want to pick a book that I'm really gonna like, and that kind of thing, and want to recommend, and all that kind of thing. It's the first one in the list that I'll be posting at the end of this year, so you want it to be a good one. And that book is You're the Only One I've Told: The Stories Behind Abortion by Mira Shah. Mira Shah, she's a doctor. She is actually chief medical officer of Planned Parenthood Hudson Peconic. I might be saying that wrong. And essentially this book is a book of stories of, I believe, 12 people who've basically experienced abortion, that kind of thing. And it's just like a beautiful, honest, and deeply important book, especially in these times post-Roe. I think it's important to continue to speak about abortion and reading stories like this. And Dr. Shaw is someone who does family care and things like that. And she starts the book actually at this moment somewhere in the South of the United States. I forget where. And she's talking to someone in a grocery aisle. And I'm a doctor yet. And the lady says to her, oh, what do you do? And she's like telling us what was running through her mind in the time of kind of all right, I'm confident. I'm so happy with what I do. I don't just do abortion care, but I want to make sure the conversation could change with this person. She might, see me differently or treat me differently, or who knows what's going to happen. I'm assuming I'm in the South. She's an older lady. If I actually say what I do, will the conversation change? But I also want to be honest, and yada, yada, yada. She tells her what she does. And the woman says, no one knows this, but I got an abortion myself some years ago. And she briefly tells her story. Then the alarm goes on saying the store's closing in 5 minutes. Everyone come up to the tills and, get your stuff, and basically time to get out. So she didn't really have more time to talk with the woman, but she says I wish I got a chance to. And if she happens to be reading this now, thank you for, your brief moment of vulnerability with me. And it's just a very beautiful thing. And she was saying I was making all these assumptions because of where I was, because of her age, things like that. But I've heard from so many people, and so many people in this book, they had not told these stories to really anyone in their life, and they were so being able to be honest and open with me, whether they're my patients or not. I don't even remember if any of them were her patients, actually. I think some of them might have been. I need to remember that. But basically giving these stories and putting them in this book, and they're everyday stories. They're not sensationalized to fit a particular narrative or anything like that, but they're simply are what they are. And she creates such a space, I feel where people can tell the truth about their experience with care and dignity. And again, as I mentioned, in a world post-Roe in the U.S., fear is widespread, and it's justified fear about access to abortion, access to just general health care. And I feel this kind of openness in books like this is especially urgent and important to read. And we need to talk about abortion more, so it's no longer treated as an anomaly. It's something that Shaw was talking about a lot in terms of wanting to frame it in a way that stop trying to make it sound strange or make it like it's, you know, an other thing. It's a part of life and it's essential healthcare. And I think the book helps do exactly that. And again, I highly recommend it. As I said at the top, all the books I read this month, I gave 5 stars, and this certainly was a 5 out of 5 read for me. Again, as I kind of just said, highly recommend you reading it. For women especially, but I think anybody, you know, abortion affects everybody, honestly. And it's a really great book, and I'm happy that that was the first book of the year for me. Second book of 2026, second book of 2026, 2nd of January as well, is one that this was already stamped as one of my favorites of the year, even though I've only read 3 so far. It is Doughnut Economics, 7 Ways to Think Like a 21st Century Economist by Kate Raworth. This book was excellent, and it's one that everyone needs to read like yesterday. I feel like Kate Raworth she dismantles the idea that endless growth is the ultimate measure of success and replaces it with a framework that feels both intuitive and urgently needed. If you've been on this channel for a while, especially this past year in 2025, I wanted to read a lot more economic text, and I did just that. And I read a lot about growth and GDP and all these kind of things. And I was thinking a lot about growth by Daniel Susskind that I read last year, that talks a lot about growth and how people are so, worlds and economies are so focused on growth and going back and tracing and all those kind of things. You could look at that, back on one of my videos if you'd like to see my discussions on that. But Raworth is she's especially strong at showing how outdated many of the assumptions we still teach as economics really are. The fixation on GDP, the myth of the rational, self-interested individual, and the belief that growth will eventually fix inequality and environmental harm on its own. The book, I highlighted, if you look at my Goodreads, you'll see all each of the 7 little tips, and obviously she delves into each of them, but she's really going into we need to actually think about different ways of being, because this is not working for an overwhelming majority of us. And that's something I really appreciate about books like this, because it's not just oh, this is my critique and this sucks, and then all right, see ya, good luck. But it's actually offers possibilities and a hopeful vision in terms of how we could go forward in the 21st century. And I think this book would be amazing for people who are in economics, who are studying economics right now, to be reading. And even someone like me who's not studying economics, but who's just interested in learning more about it and wanting to think of ways that we can be better and whatnot. It was excellent for me to read in terms of just that perspective. And I got so many great things from it, and great just ideas, and some of the same ideas in here I've seen flowing through other books that I read, again, kind of especially in this past year. And it was just really great. And this book, again, as I was talking about, in a way to go forward, it's gives ideas in terms of how to design an economy in a world that's regenerative, distributive by default, not extractive, and unequal by accident. And by the way, this isn't some fantasy land I'm making up. This reframing and this way forward is actually quite grounded and practical, and it's already happening in multiple cities around the world. So why not actually try it on a larger scale? It's not it's, oh yeah, this is just some random idea I heard about. No, this actually has been being done, and has been really, really positive, the outcomes and things like that. And I want to try to find it actually quickly, because there's this great question that she poses towards the end of the book. I might just be able to remember it, but it was kind of she said, if you ever get bored, you're at a dinner party, if you happen to be with an economist, why don't you ask them what is the goal past growth, or what are we going to do if growth can't. Let me actually look it up now, because I really want to mention this. All right, I found it. I highlighted it. It is on page, it doesn't give me the page number, but you can find it on my Goodreads. It's one of the last things I've highlighted. All right, it says, a question that she poses. If you find yourself in the company of economists and wishing for an icebreaker, here's a fun game you could play, and all you need is a piece of paper and a pencil. Simply ask an economist to draw for you a picture of the long-term path of economic growth. I should start the book too, so I could show the graph, but you should look it up. It's really great. If you are wondering what shape they will sketch on the page, don't rush to the textbooks to find out, because the answer isn't there. It may sound extraordinary, but despite having adopted GDP growth as the de facto goal of economic policy, the textbooks never actually depict how it is expected to evolve over the long term. Yes, there may be graphs showing various economic cycles ranging from the 7-year boom and bust of business cycles to the 50-year waves known as Condorif waves that are due to technological innovation, but it is rare indeed to come across a graph plotting several centuries of past GDP growth, let alone a diagram suggesting that might happen in centuries ahead. Is the answer so obvious that the textbooks need not bother? Quite the opposite. It is so challenging that they do not dare. The long-term future of GDP growth, that medusa of economic theory, is simply too dangerous to draw because it forces economists to face up to their deepest assumptions about growth. But if you are lucky enough to find an economist willing to play this little game, you may actually come to glimpse the Gorgon's terrible form. Here we go. I'm trying to see if there's anything else. Oh, here. And then she goes on. Handed your pencil and paper, any mainstream economist of the last half century will most likely draw the very same image that we encountered in Chapter 1, an ever-rising line known as the exponential growth curve, in which GDP increases by a fixed percentage, be it 2% or 9% of its current size every period. They would, however, instinctively leave its leading tip hanging midair as if suspended animation. The trouble for economists who produce this picture is the obvious question that is left hanging in the air with that. What happens next? There are essentially two options. Either the line keeps rising indefinitely, rapidly shooting up off the top of the page, or it must start to flatten out and eventually come to a level. For the mainstream economists, the first option is awkward, the second unconsolable, and here's why. I'm going to keep going because this is a really great part I liked. Unchecked exponential growth. The first option will, by its own logic, always shoot up towards infinity and far more quickly than we imagine. Indeed, it is a well-earned reputation for creeping up on us because our brains evolved to be good at adding, but infamously bad at compounding. This is not just a problem for budding mathematicians to worry about, as the nuclear physicist Al Bartlett warned. The greatest shortcomings of the human race is our inability to understand the exponential function. That is because if something grows exponentially, be it algae on a pond, debt in the bank, or a nation's energy use, it will get much bigger faster than we expect. A 10% growth rate means that something will double in size every 7 years. A 3% growth rate sounds far more modest, but it still leads to doubling in size every 23 years. What would that imply for GDP growth? In 2015, world GDP, known as the gross world product, was around 80 billion. And the global economy was growing at around 3% per year. If it continued indefinitely at that rate, the global economy would be nearly 3 times bigger by 2050, over 10 times bigger by 2100, and astonishingly almost 240 times bigger by 2200. Take note, not a penny of that growth in value would be due to inflation. It is due only to the logic of compound growth. Most economists, like the rest of us, would be hard-pressed to envisage thriving global economy of such extraordinary proportions, especially given the stress that humanity already puts on the planet, and so they may prefer to wave the implications off to the horizon. No one epitomizes this approach to literally and influentially as the American economist Walt W. Rostow, who in 1960 published his seminal book, The Stages of Economic Growth, renowned for its dynamic theory of economic development. Every country, he claimed, must pass through 5 stages of growth so that it can come to enjoy the blessings and choices opened up by the march of compound interest. The 5 stages are yada yada. Anyways, I went kind of long there on that, but I may actually end on this piece. This is kind of jumping ahead a little bit in the text, but the 21st century task is clear: to create economies that promote human prosperity in a flourishing web of life so that we could thrive in balance within the donut safe and just space. It starts with recognizing that every economy, local to global, is embedded within society and within the living world. Once we accept the economy's inherent complexity, we can shape its ever-evolving dynamics through smart stewardship that opens up the possibility of turning today's divisive and degenerative economies into ones that are distributive and regenerative by design. And it invites us to become agnostic about growth, creating economies that enable us to thrive whether or not they are growing. Yeah, so that's towards the end of the book. This is in the time when she's talking about She's taken us through this whole thing, talking about, again, similar to Susskind in a way, like where this growth came from and how things were manipulated in sense, even though it was like known that some certain things wouldn't really work out well, but they're like, oh, we're going to keep it because obviously like the people who want to keep it. But she gives, this analysis and then gives like inspiration for the new generation to kind of go forward. And again, also the beginning of the book starts with, I bring this up and talk about the new generation, it starts with kind of a story, a quick brief story, and ends with her as well. Yuan Ying, who is now, she's an MP, I forget where she's an MP of, but in England. She, right when I started the book, she was like the first 2 words. I'm being like, hey, I read her book, Private Revolutions, last year or the year before. Excellent book. I really highly recommend it. She's an economist, and she was talking about her kind of story, going in school and kind of like her and some of her students revolting in terms of some of the things they were learning and things like that, and wanting to basically like do something else. Yeah, I'm going to put up a picture on the side of kind of like this donut that, we are kind of going throughout this text. And I know I read a long bit of passage there, and I hope I kind of made sense with it. But again, it's kind of like long-term, just like, oh, we're just exponential growth is not actually good in terms of like, yeah, like it was good in certain periods, but like we have to have something else coming with that because it's not as kind of just laid out there. Like that's not gonna like actually work out the way I think we want it to. In terms of like the long scale. And I think we are definitely seeing that now. And we will continue to, unless we kind of, as kind of Rayworth lays out here, think of something that's going to be more regenerative, more distributive, and just like better for everyone on every level. And it's just a really great book. I really just highly recommend it. Really, really highly recommend it. 5 out of 5 stars. And yeah, read that like yesterday. I feel like everyone needs to read that book. Excellent. All right, the third book for the month of January, and third book of the year so far, is Finding My Way by Malala Yousafzai. It's a memoir, came out late last year, and it was excellent. As I already said about all these other books, I gave this a 5 out of 5. I wasn't necessarily going to read this at first. I saw Malala doing a little bit of a press tour when this came out end of October. And I saw she was promoting it and basically talking about, it's like sharing some of her stories, like when her time at Oxford and like post Nobel Prize. Obviously, she is the youngest Nobel Peace Prize winner. She won it when she was 17 years old after being targeted by the Taliban and having to basically be forced to move out of her home in Swat Valley, Pakistan, and ended up moving to England, going to school there, etc. Talking about how like I was Malala. I feel like I don't even see more of that. I feel like everyone, she's definitely a household name. And all this pressure on her at such a young age and kind of like, oh, I have to be this perfect person. And also like I was dealing with like so many different things and like my home life, my personal life, obviously being targeted. She still has full-time security, things like that. And seemingly will forever, as I know she stated on a recent interview. So it was kind of interesting to hear in terms of like, I was trying to just like live my life and like be me and not just be Malala, the youngest Nobel Peace Prize winner, but just be like a girl in school and have friends and try activities and all types of things. But there's always like such an eye on me in terms of the outside world. My family talks about her mother a lot, wanting her to like, do things a certain way and, kind of growing up in a certain religion and things like that and style in terms of like how women are supposed to be and like how she was treated differently versus her 2 younger brothers who, she was getting all this vitriol for like wearing jeans after she finished a rowing thing, but her 2 younger brothers had no problem. Once they moved to England, they immediately started wearing jeans and whatnot and had no problem, and the kind of differences that men and women deal with. Anyways, all that to say, so I heard about this book coming out. I was like, oh yeah, it sounds interesting, but I don't know if I'll read it, like, just, I don't know. But I decided to kind of towards the end of the year, like after I saw some things, again, it came out in October, probably around November or December, I said, I think I'm going to read it. One of the reasons why I decided I was going to read it was her book, I Am Malala, came out, I think maybe 2014. I might be wrong, or maybe 2013. When I was like a senior in high school. I think, or maybe a junior in high school, depending on the year. I don't remember, but she's around my age. But I remember, especially in the time, especially after she won the Nobel Peace Prize, if people didn't already know her then, people definitely knew, her now. After she won that Nobel Peace Prize. She won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2014, so I believe her book came out the year before. So she, of my age and things like that, so I definitely knew of her. And her book was one that I bought. I still have it. I have it digitally. I remember I had it on my iPad, and this was a time where I wasn't reading that much outside of like my requirements for school. And I remember her book. I read the beginnings of her book, like the first, probably up to 5 chapters maybe. I probably have read those first 5 chapters probably like 20 times, because I would get in this thing often where I would do that a lot then, and I did for a while until I started like fully getting into my reading thing again, where I would start reading a book and then put it down and pick something else up, maybe another book or whatever it was, and maybe not come back to it. But then I'd be like, oh, it's been so long since I read that book, I would start again. So I did that a lot with her book, and I literally remember when I actually fully read the book, I went, starting from the beginning again and saw all my highlights that I already had and things like that, and being like, oh, I'm finally like officially reading it now. And I'm pretty sure I read that book like in full, probably like 5 years after its publishing, probably in 2018 is when I fully read it, and it was an excellent memoir detailing, her experiences in terms of her advocacy before and after the direct targeting from the Taliban, and like her surgery and, rising to prominence. And again, this was published before she won the Nobel Peace Prize, so obviously that helped, like I mentioned, propel it more. So all those things, I was like, hey, that was a really good book. I remember, I read it some years ago and things like that, and I'm interested to hear in terms of like Malala talking about her experiences, because we know Malala as Malala, the person who's like this amazing Nobel Peace Prize winner, advocacy for education, all these kind of things. But like, what about like Malala, like the person? And this book really was like Malala, the person. And she was reflecting on experiences from her time in school, like, around 5 years ago. She graduated from Oxford, I think in 2021. So 5 years ago at this point, or almost. But even like, a couple years before then and things like that, and kind of like saying like, I was in school and I was making these friends, and I was like Malala, but I was trying to just like make friends and just be normal, and I had my security trailing me, and I started, she details the experience of her, like meeting her now husband and dating him, which really wasn't a thing. Like, you're not really supposed to date in her culture, in her like community, things like that, and deciding like to actually get married because she didn't really want to get married ever, and all those kind of things. And it was just a really great look into her life, and look into her experiences. And again, as I mentioned earlier, detailing like some of the differences that she went through versus her siblings went through, and the pressures that her mother, her father, her family put on her, pressure she put on herself. Talks very openly about like her anxiety. Like, she never went to therapy until like basically being hit with a panic attack when she was like about to graduate at Oxford, about to do her exams, things like that. And like finally like went to like a therapist and was like had anxiety, PTSD, obviously, those kind of things. Some of the stereotypes around doing that, and like after she was leaving the hospital after the attack, her father being like, yeah, people who need therapy are like weak-minded, like she's all right. Again, being like a 14, 15-year-old girl who's just gone through this horrific thing and kind of just having to deal with it, move on, becoming the financial person for the family in terms of like being able to provide from all these pressures and just like things just like going on. I just really, really thought it was just a really wonderful memoir, and again, a really wonderful look, and to help. She's said in her press tour kind of like, I know I'm Malala, things like that, but like I'm just like a girl, a woman, just like everyone else is, and I have my ups and downs, I have things, and I want to just be able to share these things tonight. I think when you can able to peel the curtain back like that, when you have someone like that who's such a role model, I think it's a great thing to do. And it's like, let's remember, like, these people are, we put them on such high pedestals, and we can still leave her there. She is, remarkable. And like, as I mentioned before, that book, I Am Malala, is excellent. I recommend it for everybody, but especially children who are in that kind of same age. I'm thinking I want to give it to my younger god siblings, when they're like in high school. I think would be kind of a good age. And then books like this, I think this is one they could follow up and read when they maybe are a little bit older, so they can maybe understand what she was going through and what she's been able to come through. And yeah, so really great book, really, really great. Glad I read it. Again, as I said, I recommend you read this one. And yeah, so those are the 3 books I read for January 2026. As I said, all 5 out of 5 stars. I don't think that's ever happened. And again, if it has, it's been quite a while. So I'm really glad to have started the month this way with these 3 great reads by 3 women. And yeah, we're looking forward to the rest of the year with my reads. I have a couple on deck. I'm kind of in a period right now with so much going on in the world where I'm like trying to get and also in general, in January, I was doing this thing where I was watching a movie every day. So that kind of took up a lot of my reading time. But in general, I'm in a stage where I'm, you know, I have some great books I'm really looking forward to reading, but it's kind of just about, you know, getting down and doing it. I have one right here that I started reading in January before the Malala book that I put down, and I picked the Malala book instead, and I picked it up again like earlier this week. Didn't kind of put it back down again, but I got to kind of get back on my grind and get back on the books. And I do, this book I'm reading right now or I need to be reading right now. Technically I have, if you see my Goodreads, you'll see what book it is. I do also kind of want to read something that's, you know, something maybe light. This is a novel, as I mentioned, so that's nice, but novels don't always mean light. So whether that be in terms of the movies I rewatched the Home Alones yesterday. I'm really kind of just rambling here. I don't know. But so if you have recommendations for me, please do so. Reading for me is something I really enjoy so much, but something I think about as well, even thinking back to like talking about Doughnut Economics with you all earlier. It's been able to, especially these economic books and in the times we're living in, it's been able to heighten my awareness on so many different things, and some of these other nonfiction books that I've been reading as well has, but it does add a lot to the head that's already kind of there, just like from like living life. So yeah, I have some books back there that I've had for a while that I want to read, that I think are kind of like silly and fun, that I think I'm going to get to. Probably I'm trying to reread one of my favorite books ever this year. That one that's usually, you know, might be a little bit of a tearjerker, but is one that I really, really enjoy. 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo that I have back there. Things like that. So all this to say, recommend anything you have. I will take anything, and looking forward to the recommendations people have. I have a lot of good ones on deck. I'm already looking at my little list here that I have. You know, basically like kind of on my next up ideas list for reading, and already have on hold at the library, etc., etc. But let's wrap this up to the end. Thanks so much for watching again. Find me on Goodreads at Aaliyah Langley, and all my profiles are pretty much at Aaliyah Langley, apart from my Instagram, which is at Aaliyah Langley Pro, but you know, you could find me. So do that. Again, thanks for watching. Thanks for hanging around, talking books with me. Tell me some of the books you've been reading this past year, this month, that kind of thing. Looking forward to your recommendations, comments, anything like that. So really appreciate everyone. Have a great rest of your day or night or whatever time you're watching this. Have a great one. See you in the next one.